Hello again, everybody. I'm Greg Forster with Karam Fellowship. Karam Fellowship is a community of theological educators, but educators take many forms and do many different kinds of work. And one of the very first people when we launched to sign up to become a member of Karam Fellowship is my old friend Geoff Hsu at Flourish, San Diego. So we're delighted to bring you a talk with Geoff in our member spotlight this month. Geoff, thank you for being with us.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. And I hope when you said oldest, you meant more like chronologically engaged with you rather than age.
That's a Kairos time, not a Chronos time. Thanks, Geoff. Geoff, would you just quickly give us the quick version of what is Flourish San Diego?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So there's a quick version. We like to say Flourish San Diego. Our name is our aim. That's the really quick version. We think the idea of human flourishing is just a great way to capture what God's redemptive purposes are and a reminder of what God has called the church to be a sign and foretaste as well as an instrument and agent of here in the city. So, and at the heart of that is we help congregational leaders navigate the great changes in culture so that they can form the kinds of people that love our city to life.
Thank you so much. And I've been encouraged seeing your work over the years. So let me ask you, because I want to know more about it. What are you trying these days as an educator that's going well?
Yeah. Well, what's going well is always a fuzzy thing for me, but what we've been trying is to try to help pastors figure out the overall contour of what the mission of God is and that broader narrative with which we place ourselves as congregational leaders. And so what we wind up doing is teaching some of the frameworks and the paradigms, which aren't actually new, but actually relatively ancient and old, that I would say always addresses the felt need of the many millennial church planters that I interact with. So, in terms of what I feel like we're doing, is we're giving language to the disconnect that many of my millennial pastor friends would say, this is what church is supposed to be, and yet here are the forms given to us and the values, and yet we're in a world with very different challenges, and we don't know how to bring it all together. And so we think some of the conversations we have about the larger meta narrative of what God's up to in the world with regard to spiritual formation, and I learned a new term this week, virtue ethics. You know, these kinds of things actually allow us to root what we need to be going forward into what has gone before, and actually is really quite useful for us.
That's fantastic. I died a little bit inside when you said millennial church planters and millennial pastors. I'm in the same place as you, brother, but time marches on, and we are part of the Lord's plan at every stage. But that generational difference really is stark, isn't it? The new generation of leaders are just not facing the same situation and don't always we don't always connect well with them because we're so formed by a different circumstance. Has that been, an important theme for you?
Yeah. If as you're speaking, I'm thinking it's a challenge because so many times when the church planter or the younger pastor sort of comes onto the scene 40 something, right? They've got some ideas about how to appropriately contextualize the faith for this new world that we find ourselves in, and yet you still have um, elder leadership council members, that still think that whether it's building a bigger parking lot because that's what's going to draw people, um, or ideas of discipleship which do not necessarily need to include transformation of the soul, that the challenges are very disparate and wide reaching. And so it's really quite challenging, and we actually find ourselves needing to support pastors not only with how to be able to navigate the adaptive challenges in this moment, leading as as a leader, but also the spiritual formation, the emotional intelligence, and the health and well-being. So seeing pastors as whole people becomes so critically important as well. That's part of the educator role, I would say.
Definitely, those concerns are so important, and it leads to my next question. Since we as educators also need to be resilient and persevere through difficult circumstances, what's life-giving for you as an educator?
Well, I think when two things. Um, when I'm sitting with the business person and helping them realize that what they know that they are gifted at can be seen as one of God's graces upon them, and actually be the way in which this particular person can use those skills that they know they do well, in service of God's redemptive purposes. It's like the light bulb comes on, and you have a person now that wants to know more about this God and this way of being in relationship with him in ways that actually help them become more fully alive. That's marvelous. Um, and I think the same thing for pastors when they realize that banging their head against the wall, is a common experience, but it's just part of the contextualization challenge, and fresh language comes. It's like, oh, this makes so much sense for what I've been reading, but didn't know how to synthesize. And I think for educators and seminary and professors and stuff, what I love seeing is the gears gnashing, where there's a preponderance of life that comes from the thinking about ideas in the head, perhaps, but the animation of the heart through the gospel as well, brought together. Um, I enjoy that as well.
Oh yeah, those gears meshing is really fun. But one thing that really stood out to me in what you just said is fresh language, which can be so important. Can I just ask you, unfold a bit, where do you see the role of fresh language in your work?
Yeah, well, as you know, in our space, just to be able to talk about the different postures that the church might have toward culture, um, fortification, right? Culture's evil. We got to be Amish. Domination, we need to legislate, right? A fresh morality. Accommodation, we don't need to be offensive. How do we just kind of look like everyone else? The language of incarnation, of faithful presence, being faithfully present to God, both before the people of God, but also before the people that are not yet in relationship with the Lord and may even never be. But, how do we be faithfully present? Even there, right, in terms of our postures to culture, we've been talking about for a long time, but that still unlocks a fresh sense of possibility about what my faith can look like as I engage all the crazy things that happen in the world. It helps, for example, like in resourcing our pastors. During the pandemic, we had this critical race theory come up, and its underlying critical theory and all those pieces. Well, if you're not able to pay attention to those things, and you think, oh, I need to virtue flag somehow on my social media for one position or another, there's very little thought regarding how we can faithfully be the body of Christ in these sorts of conversations, because we have knee-jerk reactions given our traditional posture to culture. That's
Right,
one
and
way the language changes.
fresh language can force people to think in a way that they wouldn't otherwise because they don't have a pre-programmed response to a fresh way of putting it.
Or knee-jerk reaction.
Right. That's right. So let me ask you my last question as we turn from challenges to encouraging things. Tell us about three things you're involved with, either at Flourish San Diego or in any other context. Three things that you're encouraged about.
Great. This past year, so we know that we can work with pastors, congregational leaders, ministry leaders in terms of reframing what it means to faithfully follow Jesus in today's world. And what I long for is to to see that same conversation regarding emotional health, spiritual formation, as well as professional growth and development happen in every sector, nook and cranny, sphere, if that helps for you, of society. And so, but I know I can't start it. So this past year, we had the great privilege of being a fiscal sponsor of a group of artists and musicians to come together to form essentially the same sorts of things that we do with pastors, but with these musicians. And I can't tell you how much life that has breathed into this group of musicians, particularly about half of which are worship leaders, and about 2/3 of the worship leaders having been experienced church hurt because they were not embraced as whole people with their tools, but only as musicians to serve the agenda of, you know, the religious programming. To provide a religious goods and service, when in fact they knew that they were created for more. And so, in this past year, to hear the stories of people who might even be further away from the faith that we feel comfortable with because of that church hurt, to once again come back to the faith, or even come to the faith for the first time, to be able to hear about how they were able to be supportive of one another through the great challenges that were experienced even in this past calendar year. And in an industry where you get paid pennies, if anything, for the music that you create. So that's just been beautiful to hear the support, the increased creativity that's flowed out of that, and their desire to do another year at least before launching as a nonprofit or perhaps staying as an initiative of ours. The second piece I would say is that same sort of conversation has spilled over to millennial entrepreneurs and business people. People who because of their desire to follow Jesus know that there's so much more that their faith can contribute to. And so to help, it's just delightful for me to think about these folks can think about being a redemptive presence in the world, and through their work and multiple bottom lines and all that stuff. So to be able to backfill some of the theology and how the gospel, I'm just delighted about that. I think the last thing I'd say is this broader conversation regarding theological anthropology, whatever the language is that I have found is done a much better job of being able to say, this is what I think the faith needs to look like. And it's not new. It's not a fad. There are pieces here that talk about, you know, about well-being and wholeness of people and cities and communities that can be undergirded by the philosophical and theological conversations of a previous generation, a previous time. And that conversation is very encouraging to me because it gives me a little bit more, this is not new, right? And so I think to the degree in which the marvelous educators of the Oikonomia Network are able to contribute to those kinds of things, it is a blessing to me. And so that's why I'm part of this network. Honorary educator, not quite full-fledged theologian, but I'm a practical guy. And so when it comes to being able to apply the work that's being done in for the sake of our city, I'm just delighted and excited about that.
Well, we're blessed to be a blessing, and we're blessed to have you. All Christians are theologians, even if they're not academic theologians. All Christians are theologians. And you're definitely an educator bringing this theological knowledge to so many people. As you were speaking, that importance of fresh language kept coming back to me, talking whether it's Dallas Willard's line about religious goods and services as a model the church has to escape, or the idea of seeking new language for theological anthropology, or that, oh my goodness, I can't remember the one in the middle, but there was something you said that stuck with me. I'll remember it as soon as we're done, I'm sure. But Geoff, thank you
Yes.
so much. We are delighted to have you in Karam Fellowship, and we hope that that there will continue to be this kind of open bridge between the academic world and the church at large.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for the privilege of being here.
Thanks, Geoff.